Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, everybody, for coming along. It's a pleasure to speak at this wonderful conference. I've got another title just to make it a little bit quicker. How, when and for whom? My disclosures, I do receive some funding from Gilead Sciences. And just by way of background, and we've been talking numbers all afternoon, but those of you who may not know, 240 million people have chronic infection for hepatitis B. So yes, although there is a preventative vaccine, we have 240 million people living in the world who have chronic hepatitis B, which causes liver cancer. Most of these people reside in poorer nations, be they Asia, Africa, and South America. This is a huge public health problem for which there is no cure. And in Australia, 232,000 people at last count live with chronic hepatitis B. And the terrible statistic is 90,000 people don't even know they've got it. If you don't know you've got it, you're not going to the doctor, you're not going to be receiving life-saving treatment. And chronic hepatitis B disproportionately affects Indigenous populations in Australia and people of culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. It's terrible that in 2017, people of Indigenous populations, particularly in the Northern Territory, are 5 times more likely to have chronic hepatitis B than non-Indigenous Australians. This is disgraceful and must be addressed. Why do we need a cure when we have such a good vaccine? And Heidi's talked very eloquently about the preventative vaccine, but it is a preventative vaccine. It stops you getting hepatitis B. But if you've already got chronic hepatitis B, it won't cure you. And in fact, in 2010, the estimates were that with current vaccination, we would reach 191,000 people with chronic hepatitis B by 225. But in fact, I've already told you there's 232,000 people already living with chronic hepatitis B, so we've already outreached those figures anyway. This despite birth dose vaccine reaching over 95% of kiddies in Australia. So the vaccine is just part of the armour eaten for viral elimination, but for those 240 million, or in Australia, 232,000 people living with chronic hepatitis B, the vaccine is of no benefit at all. And we've heard about the effective treatments as well, and Gitan has talked very eloquently about tenofovir and these various treatments. But there's a big difference between the Hep C treatments, which are cures for 95% of people, and the Hep B treatments, which are not cures. They lower the viral replication level and they make the chronic infection manageable, but they do not cure. If you stop treatment, the virus returns, and that means treatment is lifelong. So people with chronic hepatitis B have lifelong therapy. And only 6% of people with chronic hepatitis B are receiving treatment. Worldwide, it's about 1%. So we've got some real issues to address with access and equity for therapy. And access to the current therapies must be improved. Hepatitis B is, as I've said, it's currently incurable. But in us, in people, some people naturally develop what's called a functional cure, where you develop an antibody response that clears the virus. And depending on how you get your hepatitis B, that's either more or less likely to happen. Most hepatitis B is transmitted from mother to baby. So through no fault of anybody, the baby gets infected from the mum. In 95% of those cases, the young child will go on to develop a chronic infection. If healthy adults get hepatitis B, assuming they're not vaccinated, 95% people will actually have a robust immune response that clears the virus. So only 5% will develop chronic infection. But that 5%, so 95% who clear the virus, mean that it is actually possible to functionally cure the virus. But in the laboratory, we're yet to come up with a way to actually do that, and that's a major challenge for the field. But it suggests that functional cure, unlike HIV, functional cure for hepatitis B is indeed possible. And is it a realistic goal? Now, they discovered the receptor for hepatitis B only in 2012. Okay, this is how the virus gets into the cell, and this has changed the way we do things in the laboratory fantastically. We can now study the whole hepatitis B life cycle. One of the tricks with hepatitis B, the reason it's so good at establishing chronic infection, is it has what's called a viral reservoir. It has a bit of DNA that gets into the nucleus of the cell that's not touched by any therapy. So this is what's responsible for persistence. But there's laboratories and pharmaceutical companies all around the world, particularly now that it looks as though hepatitis C cure has been very successful. A lot of those companies now directing their attention to hepatitis B. And please don't take too much notice of this slide, except to point out the take-home message is that there's lots of companies targeting lots of different stages of the hepatitis B life cycle. No one yet has come up with a way of targeting that nuclear reservoir, which is actually the critical step, but people are working on it. So the success of the hepatitis C regimens has indeed raised expectations of hepatitis B cure. I mean, a lot of people don't know the difference between the two viruses, right? Hepatitis is hepatitis. We've now cured hepatitis C in most people, or we can cure hepatitis C if they've got access to treatment for most people. And for HIV, cure programs have been running now since 2010, but until recently there's been no global coordinated approach to HBV cure. So in 2016, last year, a few of us published what we called a call to arms paper to try and mobilise the hepatitis B community, research community and advocacy groups and clinicians to construct a coalition, if you like, a coalition of the willing to eliminate hepatitis B. And we call this the International Coalition to Eliminate Hepatitis B, with the acronym, somewhat controversial acronym if you like, of ICE-HBV. I work in a laboratory. My daughter now tells me I work in an ICE lab, not a hepatitis lab. There you go. So we have established this coalition. We've called it the ICE-HBV, the International Coalition to Eliminate Hepatitis B. And we've got representatives from academia, from basic and clinical sciences, from industry and from the HBV-affected community. And what we're doing, and this is based on a model that was very successful with the HIV field, through the International AIDS Society, we've established international working groups for virology, immunology, innovative tools and clinical trials. And these 4 pillars of HBV research are going to drive cure programs in a coordinated approach, but very importantly, this is a global approach. This is not just something we're setting up here in Melbourne. We've established this with a major institute in France, and our working groups have members from all over the world, particularly from Africa and countries and poorer countries. We've established a provisional governing board. We have an honorary president who's very famous in our field. He's an emeritus professor, Professor Frank Cesari, and he's a fantastic advocate for hepatitis research. We've appointed a project manager. Capucine Pennico comes to us from 5 years' experience in the HIV Cure Initiative, and she's prepared our strategic plan. And we've established these working groups. The names may not mean much to many of you, but these are world leaders in the field. They're not Australians, they're from all over the globe, be they Europe, Latin America, United States and Asia. Working together, these working groups are going to drive the field for hepatitis B cure. We've established a stakeholders group of affected communities and industry and various other organisations who are going to guide the research. So it's not just researchers in their laboratories, in their universities, in their ivory towers coming up with the ideas. We're going to work with the affected community and work out what research really needs to be done that's going to have the most progress. We've got a website about 4 weeks ago. This is a really new initiative, folks. So our website's now online. Those of you with your iPhones, jump on board and have a look. And the working groups are initially presenting a joint position paper, if you like, a perspectives paper to guide the field, similar to what's been published in a recent Nature journal for HIV. We're also supporting specific projects on HBV research. I'll touch on one briefly in a moment. And we're promoting HBV cure initiatives to try and increase funding for hepatitis B research worldwide, because as Heidi said earlier, there's been $30 billion gone into HIV cure research, and perhaps the hepatitis fields have certainly been neglected up until now. When will we have a cure? And that was part of Margaret's title. Peter, you've got to say when we're going to have a cure. And I'm actually not going to give a number. I mean, it would be terrific to think we've got a cure for hepatitis B in 10 years. But the way I'll answer the question is that if someone had said 5 years ago, when will we have a cure for hepatitis C, people would not have been able to estimate that we've got the cure now. So we believe that a coordinated approach to curing hepatitis B will in fact speed up the approach. I do like to think that within 10 years we'll have curative approaches for hepatitis B, but there are indeed many challenges. Chronic hepatitis B is not a one-size-fits-all disease, and Heidi mentioned the different genotypes. We've got 9 different genotypes across the globe. I've touched on the different modes of transmission, which affects the likelihood of chronicity. The natural history to disease severity and response to treatment differs by these genotypes, and the host immune response differs greatly over the course of infection. So these are some of the challenges the field's facing with developing cures for hepatitis B. And I've mentioned this nuclear reservoir, if you like. It's this what we call covalently closed circular DNA. This DNA hides in the nucleus of the cell and is very, very difficult to treat. But the slide I'm showing you there shows that we can now detect this cccDNA in the laboratory. This is some work we've done at the Doherty Institute. And if you can detect it and measure it, you can target it. And so there's lots of focus, both at the Doherty but also worldwide, on targeting this molecule. If you can target that, you can eliminate hepatitis B. How are we going to ensure equity of access? And Gaten has talked about this as well, and others. It's very, very important that curative regimens are available for all ethnicities, all age groups, including children. Hepatitis B is largely a disease of children, and that's often overlooked. All demographics, irrespective of income, easily accessed. It's a wonderful ASHM program that, where hepatitis B treatments are available through S100 prescribers. So you don't have to go to a specialist hepatologist or gastroenterologist to get your hepatitis B treatments. Okay, so these are all challenges for the current treatments. The same challenges are going to be there for curative therapies as they come on board. So despite the availability of effective and life-saving but not curative treatments yet, still only 1% of people worldwide are receiving these therapies overall. And as I've said earlier, 90,000 Australians don't even know they've got hepatitis B. The curative regimens are likely to face the same difficulties. But the WHO target is that 50% of all eligible persons will receive treatment by 2030. This is the current treatments. And our Australian second national hepatitis B strategy calls for 20% by 2020. We're currently at 6%, so these are ambitious but important targets. It's only going to happen if there is an increase in awareness, if there's a large increase in funding from governments across the globe, including Australia, and this includes funding for hepatitis B research as well. But increased funding is only part of the answer. We as scientists need to engage with and learn from the HPV-affected community, similar to the HIV and perhaps to a lesser extent the hepatitis C experience. In the HIV setting, this changed the way drugs were progressed to the clinic and ensured more rapid access to therapy. So at ICE HPV, we're working with our scientific and stakeholder groups to try and ensure that this happens for hepatitis B. So thank you all for your attention. I thank the people on the slide, and thank you very much.